July 3rd, 9:14 a.m. Savannah, Georgia. I was still in my slippers when I heard the sentence that split my life clean in two. Mom, you don't have a home anymore. I already got the money. Nathan stood in my hallway, sunlight behind him, documents in his hand. My own name was scrawled across them in a clumsy imitation of my signature. Next to the papers lay an official receipt. $312,400, transferred to N. Monroe. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He only added, almost casually, "You never remember what you sign anyway." At that exact moment my phone buzzed on the counter. A notification lit the screen. "Your account has been temporarily frozen due to suspected fraud." For a moment it felt as if the floor simply let go beneath me. My fingertips went cold around the edge of the kitchen chair. How could my own child do this to me? If you want to hear the full story from the beginning, stay with me. And now let me take you back to where it all truly began. My name is Alice Monroe, and for most of my life I believed that if I worked hard, stayed honest, and gave my children every bit of steadiness I could muster, the world would give a little gentleness back. For 35 years, I was a registered nurse at Memorial Hospital here in Savannah. I learned the rhythm of night shifts, the soft beeping of monitors, the way fear sits in a family's throat when they are waiting for news. I held hands, adjusted blankets, whispered comfort into rooms that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. It was not glamorous work, but it was human work, and it shaped me. When my husband, Daniel, died unexpectedly, the house felt impossibly large. Nathan was 17 then, old enough to see my grief, young enough to believe he should fix it. I remember him standing at the foot of the stairs with a determined look, saying, "I'll take care of you, Mom." I believed him. Maybe that memory is what blinded me later, when I should have watched more carefully. As he grew older, Nathan carried an ambition that looked like confidence but always edged toward impatience. He changed jobs often, always searching for something that would break open luck for him. His wife, Rebecca, came into his life like a polished coin, bright, smooth, quick to roll out of reach. She worked in event management, always dressed well, always polite. But her eyes, when they rested on me, held a tightness that felt like a door never fully opening. She smiled, yes. She even called me Mom on holidays. But the warmth never seeped through. Over the years they accepted everything I offered. The down payment for their first condo, the emergency loan when one of Nathan's business ventures failed, the weekends when I watched their children so they could get away and reset. I told myself that supporting them was an honor. I told myself that a mother's love was measured not in what she kept, but in what she gave. But sometimes, late at night, washing the same blue mug I've used for a decade, I would feel a strange quiet in my chest, a question I never spoke out loud. Was I truly being included or merely used? I dismissed the thought every time. Exhaustion, I told myself. Widow's imagination. The natural loneliness of someone who has spent too many years listening to the hum of a refrigerator after a long shift. Still, certain moments lingered. The way Rebecca would take mail from my hands before I opened it. The quick glance Nathan and she exchanged when I asked about a bank withdrawal I didn't remember making. The small sighs whenever I double-checked something they claimed they had already explained. None of it felt harsh or overt. It was more like being nudged gently toward the edges of my own life, one quiet step at a time. I kept giving. They kept taking. And I never challenged it because the alternative, believing ill of my own child, felt unbearable. I thought loyalty would keep us close. I thought generosity meant safety. I thought love guaranteed return. I know better now. But back then, I was simply a mother trying to hold her family together with the softest parts of herself. A year before everything collapsed, something small went missing. Small enough that I tried not to make a fuss, but important enough that a quiet worry settled in the back of my mind. It was a Tuesday morning in late June, warm and bright, the kind of day when the magnolia blooms outside my porch smelled heavy and sweet. I had gone to the drawer in my study to pull out the folder where I kept my property documents. I needed the deed for a simple reason. My insurance company had requested verification for an update on my homeowner's policy. But when I opened the drawer, the folder wasn't there. I stood for a moment, staring at the empty wooden space, the dustless rectangle where the green folder should have been. At first I thought I must have moved it myself, perhaps during spring cleaning, or while looking for tax papers. I checked every drawer. Then the filing cabinet. Then the box in the closet where I kept older records. Nothing. My heartbeat picked up as I walked into the kitchen. Nathan and Rebecca were sitting at the table, sorting through a stack of envelopes I hadn't asked them to touch. They looked up in tandem like children caught in a pantry. I said, "Have either of you seen the house deed? It's missing." Nathan shrugged so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. "Mom, you probably misplaced it. People lose paperwork all the time." I remember the way Rebecca's eyes flicked away. Fast, guilty, then carefully blank. She reached for her coffee cup, though her hand trembled slightly. "I'm sure it'll turn up," she murmured. Something in her tone scratched at me, but I pushed it aside. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to accuse. I didn't even want to imagine that they might have taken something so important. Instead, I nodded and told myself to stay calm. Maybe I had tucked it somewhere unusual without realizing it. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe age was catching up with me in ways I hadn't admitted. Still, that night, after they left, the house felt uneasy. I walked through each room with my soft yellow lamp in hand, checking shelves and drawers again. I found old recipe cards, expired coupons, a photo of Daniel holding Nathan as a baby, but not the deed. As I stood in the doorway of my study, a memory tugged at me. Rebecca 3 days earlier, standing at that very drawer. She'd said she was looking for tape. At the time, nothing about it felt strange. Now, replaying it, her voice sounded too bright, her posture too rigid. I tried to silence the thought. I told myself suspicion was unkind. But lying in bed, listening to the hum of the fridge in the distant kitchen, I felt a quiet shift inside me. A thread loosening. For the first time, the idea crept into my mind that something larger, something hidden, might be unfolding behind my back. In the morning, Nathan texted me, "Don't worry about the deed. We'll help you stay organized." The message was meant to soothe, but it left a coldness in my chest. Helping me stay organized was their new phrase, one they used when they wanted to handle something without explaining why. I responded with a simple okay, though nothing felt okay. Days passed. I kept searching, though part of me knew I wouldn't find the document. I began checking my bank app more often, confirming balances, reviewing transactions, watching for anything unfamiliar. At first, everything looked normal. But the habit itself, the need to look, was the sign of something changing. Even small cracks can widen if ignored long enough. And looking back, that missing folder was the first split in the foundation of my life. The first hint that trust can be eroded not by storms, but by a quiet hand moving something in a drawer when you aren't looking. Still, I carried on. I went to work. I tended my garden. I made dinners for Nathan's children, who always hugged me sweetly and asked for extra cornbread. I kept pretending nothing was wrong, telling myself that love was stronger than doubt. I believed that if I stayed steady, whatever unease I felt would settle back into the silence. But the silence was only giving them room to move, and I was only at the beginning. After the deed disappeared, life didn't collapse all at once. Instead, it tightened around me the way a room feels smaller when someone quietly closes the windows. Nothing dramatic happened, nothing loud, just a gradual shifting of control, inch by inch, until I realized my own household no longer answered to me. It began with conversations disguised as concern. Nathan would stop by after work, lean against the doorway of my living room and say things like, "Mom, have you thought about assisted living? It might take some pressure off you." I would pause, confused, because I hadn't said anything about needing help. My mind was clear. My routines were steady. But he spoke as if a decision had already been made. When I protested, he would offer a patient smile, the kind one gives a stubborn child. "We just want what's best," he said. Rebecca added her own gentle nudges. "You know, memory issues are very common at your age," she would remark while folding laundry I had never asked her to touch. She said it as if she were reciting a fact from a magazine, but her eyes flicked over me with calculation. I felt myself brace every time she walked through my home, fingers trailing along surfaces, opening cabinets, commenting softly on how easy it would be for things to get lost. Then they began handling my bills. It happened quietly. One afternoon, I found Nathan at my dining table with my checkbook. "Mom, I paid a few things for you," he announced, waving off my questions. "You get confused with online statements. Let us take care of it." He slid the checkbook toward me. But not before I noticed he had written several checks without telling me the amounts. "It's all sorted," he said, his tone final. I remember the weight of my keys in my pocket that day, the small jingle grounding me in a way their voices didn't. My house was still mine, yet the air felt borrowed. Little by little I noticed changes. The thermostat setting would be different from where I left it. My mail would be stacked in unfamiliar order. Passwords on my computer had been updated without my consent. Rebecca once let herself in using the spare key I kept under a ceramic pot on the porch. I asked how she knew where it was. She laughed lightly. "Everyone hides keys under pots, Alice." The boundary between my life and theirs thinned until I could barely see its outline. And always there were the jokes, soft needling practiced. "Mom's memory," Nathan would say with a chuckle whenever I questioned something. "Don't worry, she forgets." I didn't forget. I noticed everything. But every objection I raised was gently dismissed, smoothed over with a smile or a sigh. I began questioning myself simply because they acted so certain. The worst part was how ordinary it all looked from the outside. To neighbors, to friends, we were a close family. They saw my son carrying groceries into my kitchen, Rebecca organizing my pantry. They didn't see the tension behind my ribs each time I sensed something slipping out of my hands. I tried grounding myself in my routines. Morning tea in my old porcelain cup. A walk through the garden, touching the rosemary sprigs Daniel once planted. But even there, I felt their presence creeping in. Nathan mentioned selling the house one day, while it still has value, as casually as mentioning the weather. Rebecca added, "Bigger places become dangerous when you get older." I remember looking at the chipped blue paint on my garden gate, thinking how many years I had passed through it freely. And yet somehow I felt cornered. One evening I overheard them in the kitchen. I had stepped into the hallway for a towel when their voices carried through the half-closed door. Rebecca whispered, "She won't fight it. She never does." Nathan replied, "Just give it time." They fell silent when I entered. Rebecca smiled too quickly and handed me a plate of sliced peaches. I took it, but my hands felt heavy. The cracks in our relationship were no longer hairline fractures. They were widening seams, shifting under my feet. I wanted to believe it was all misunderstanding, that stress made them pushy, that love made them overprotective. But I knew better. The way they moved through my home, the way they watched me, the way they spoke to each other when they thought I wasn't listening, none of it came from care. Something was being prepared. Something I wasn't meant to see. And though I didn't yet know its shape, I could feel its shadow forming. July 3rd began like any other sticky Savannah morning. The ceiling fan hummed above my bed, pushing warm air in slow circles. I remember the time clearly because I had just glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 8:52 a.m. I slipped my feet into my worn slippers, the ones with the faded blue trim, and shuffled to the kitchen to make tea. The house creaked in its usual familiar way. Nothing, in those first quiet minutes, hinted that by the end of the hour my life would be split into before and after. I had just wrapped my hands around my mug when I heard a car door slam outside. A moment later, the key turned in the lock. I frowned. Nathan rarely arrived without warning. He stepped inside with quick, clipped movements, Rebecca trailing behind him. Her face was pale, her ponytail pulled too tight. Nathan carried a thick envelope in a brown folder. He didn't bother with greetings. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. His voice had the tense, brittle edge of someone who had rehearsed this moment and wanted to get through it quickly. I wiped my hand on a dish towel, suddenly aware of how messy my robe looked, how unprepared I felt. "What is it?" I asked. He laid the folder on the kitchen table and opened it with a practiced flick. My name stared back at me from heavy cream paper. I recognized the county seal, the layout of the forms. Property transfer documents. My breath hitched. "I went ahead and took care of the sale," Nathan said. "It's done." For a second I didn't understand the words. "The sale of what?" He looked at me as if I were slow. "The house, Mom. Your house. You don't have a home anymore. I already got the money." The sentence landed like a physical blow. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never signed anything." Nathan's jaw tightened. He tapped a page with his finger. "You did. Right here." I leaned over the document. There in uneven blue ink was my name. Alice M. Monroe. The letters were clumsy, not quite right, but close enough to pass to a stranger. A notary stamp sat nearby, a name I didn't recognize. Next to the folder, half tucked underneath, lay an official receipt from the title company. $312,400, transferred to N. Monroe. My stomach lurched. Nathan, what have you done? My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at Rebecca. She kept her eyes on the floor, arms folded tightly across her chest. He finally spoke, his tone colder. You never remember what you sign anyway. This is safer. We're consolidating things before something bad happens. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed on the counter. I turned it over with numb fingers. A notification from the bank glowed on the screen. Your account has been temporarily frozen due to suspected fraud. I stared at the words, then back at the documents. My world tilted. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder, the room narrowing as if the walls were inching closer. Did you touch my accounts? I asked quietly. Nathan's eyes flashed irritation. I moved some things. You weren't using them properly. You keep forgetting to pay bills. I had to step in. You should be thanking me. A hot, sharp clarity cut through my shock. I had not forgotten a single bill. I had not authorized a single transfer. This wasn't help. This was theft wearing my son's face. My hand shook as I reached for the folder. I'm calling the bank, I said. And then I'm calling the police. That was when Nathan's composure cracked. He stepped forward, voice rising for the first time. You can't do that. You don't understand what's going on. My thumb hovered over the phone screen. Then explain it, I said. He swallowed, eyes darting to Rebecca again. She looked at him with a mix of fear and fury. Finally, he blurted. I sold it because we need to disappear, all right? I'm in debt. If I don't pay, they'll find us. This fixes everything. The words hung in the air, sour and heavy. My home, the place where I had nursed Daniel through his last days, where I had watched Nathan blow out birthday candles, where I had tended my garden through storms and summers, was nothing more to him than an escape route. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. I dialed the bank with deliberate fingers. Then, while Nathan paced and cursed and Rebecca whispered his name like a warning, I called the police. My voice was steady when I spoke. My son has sold my home without my consent, I said. I believe my signature has been forged. The officer on the other end asked for my address. As I gave it, I looked at Nathan, the boy who had once promised to take care of me, now a man willing to erase my life for cash. In that moment, something in me shattered. But something else, something older and harder, began to rise. I did not yet know what it would cost him, or what it would demand of me, only that I would not let this be the end of my story. Not anymore. When the police officers arrived, everything became strangely quiet inside me. They stood in my kitchen, their uniforms too dark against the pale cabinets Daniel and I had painted years ago. One of them, Officer Grant, took the documents from Nathan with a practiced calm. The other asked me gentle, methodical questions. Had I signed anything recently? Had I authorized any sales? Any transfers? I answered as clearly as I could. No. I would remember selling my home. I would remember giving my son $312,400. Nathan paced near the doorway, rubbing his temples. She's confused, he insisted. She's been forgetting things for months. We've been trying to help her. Officer Grant's gaze moved from him to me. Ma'am, do you feel confused? He asked. It was such a simple question. I could hear the hum of the fridge behind me, the ceiling fan ticking faintly in the living room, the chirp of a bird outside the window. I felt tired, shaken, hurt, but not confused. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it did not waver. I feel betrayed. Rebecca stood near the counter, arms wrapped around herself, eyes red. She hadn't spoken much, just soft fragments. We didn't mean. We thought. None of the sentences ever finished. None of them reached me. The officer stepped into the dining room with the folder and receipt to make some calls. Their voices became low murmurs, mixed with words like fraud, elder exploitation, signature verification, hold the funds if possible. Nathan pressed his hands to his head, fingers laced over his hair. Mom, please, he said, turning to me. You are overreacting. This is a misunderstanding. We needed to move fast, that's all. You don't get how serious things are. For a moment I almost did what I had always done. Smoothed it over, tried to make everyone comfortable, tried to understand instead of be understood. I could feel the old habit rising, a lifetime of making excuses for others, of stepping aside. I walked to the cabinet above the stove, the one where I kept the sugar and tea tins. My hand reached for it automatically. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I just needed something familiar to touch, something that had not lied to me. I opened the cabinet door, then closed it again. That tiny click echoed louder in my mind than any of Nathan's words. It was such an ordinary sound. I had heard it thousands of times. Mornings before work, evenings after late shifts, lonely nights when I made tea just to feel less alone. But now it felt different. Final. Like the closing of a chapter one hadn't realized I was still allowing to continue. In that small private sound I heard the truth. I could not change what Nathan had done. I could not rewrite the past years where I allowed their version of help to steamroll my boundaries. But I could choose what happened next. I rested my palm flat against the cabinet door, the wood warm under my skin. Never again, I whispered. Not loud, not dramatic, just a promise to myself. Never again would I hand over documents without reading them, just because someone I loved said, "Trust me." Never again would I let jokes about my bad memory pass without challenge. Never again would I trade my security for the illusion of being needed. Behind me I could hear Nathan still talking, arguing with the officers now. His words a rising wave I chose not to ride. I stood there, breathing in the faint smell of coffee and old wood, feeling the line draw itself firm and clear, between who I had been and who I was about to become. For so long, I had believed being a good mother meant giving and forgiving without limits. Standing in that kitchen, hand on the cabinet, I understood something new. Sometimes the bravest form of love is refusing to let your own life be destroyed, even if the one holding the match is your child. "Ma'am," Officer Grant called gently from the dining room. "We're going to need you to contact your bank and a lawyer. We'll document everything. This is serious, but you're doing the right thing." I turned away from the cabinet, from the old version of myself that lived so comfortably in that small, familiar movement. I walked back into the room, past Nathan's pleading eyes, past Rebecca's tight silence. "Yes," I said. "I know it is." The floor still felt unsteady, but for the first time that morning my steps did not. After the officers left, the house felt hollow, like someone had taken a deep breath and never exhaled. Nathan and Rebecca were gone too. He stormed out after arguing with the officers. She followed half a step behind, her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoiding mine. Their car pulled away, the sound of the engine fading until all that was left was the cicadas and the rumble of traffic. I stood in the center of my kitchen, my phone in my hand, the folder of stolen documents on the table. For a long moment I did nothing. Then, slowly, the training from decades as a nurse rose up in me, the part that knew what to do in an emergency. You assess. You prioritize. You act. I pulled out a yellow notepad from the drawer and uncapped a pen. The small scratch of ink against paper steadied me. At the top of the page I wrote 3 words: call, block, protect. First I called the bank. I gave my name, my account number, my date of birth. I explained in clear, measured sentences that I had not authorized any transfer of $312,400, nor had I granted anyone permission to sell my home. The representative on the line listened quietly, then placed me on hold to speak with a supervisor. As I waited, I stared at the smudge of blue ink where my son had tried to copy my signature. It looked clumsy, almost childish. That hurt more than if he'd done it perfectly. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd done it carelessly. The representative came back. "Ms. Monroe, we've confirmed suspicious activity. Your accounts are already temporarily frozen. With your permission, we'll initiate a formal fraud investigation and lock all external transfers." "Yes," I said. "Do it. And please remove any online access tied to my son's name or email." I heard typing, the soft clack of keys. "Done," she said. "You will receive documentation in the mail." "I'm sorry this happened." So was I. But sorry wouldn't save me. Action would. Next, I called the county records office. A woman named Denise answered. When I told her my home had been sold without my consent, her voice sharpened. We can place an emergency hold on any transfer of title while this is investigated, she said. I'll flag your property record right now. No further changes will be processed without direct verification from you, in person with identification. Thank you, I replied, feeling a small sliver of relief. After hanging up, I sat at the table with my notepad. The word protect stared back at me. It meant more than my bank balance in my house. It meant my future, my choices, my voice. I picked up the phone again and searched for a local elder law attorney. The first office that answered was a small firm on Bull Street. A man with a calm voice listened to my story, then said, Ms. Monroe, you've already taken important steps. Can you come in this afternoon? Bring every document you have. At 3 o'clock, I sat in a chair across from him. His name was Michael Carson. He wore simple glasses and had the kind of steady gaze that made people tell the truth. He read through the property transfer forms, the receipt, the notes I'd made during my calls, and the incident number the police had given me. When he finally looked up, he said, You're not a victim. You're a fighter. You called the right people and moved quickly. That gives us leverage. The word fighter landed oddly in my chest. I had spent my life being careful, diligent, kind. Fighter was not a word anyone had used for me. Yet, sitting there with the weight of my son's choices pressing down, the label didn't feel wrong. It felt overdue. Mr. Carson laid out a plan. We would file a formal fraud report and contest the sale. We would notify the development company, Atlantic Oaks, that the transaction was under investigation and likely void. We would pursue criminal charges if the evidence supported them. And he added gently, we would update my legal documents, power of attorney, healthcare proxy will, to ensure no one could do this again. Who is currently listed in these documents? He asked. My son, I replied. Saying it aloud felt like closing a door. He nodded. Then we'll change that. You get to decide who has access to your life, Ms. Monroe. Not the other way around. That night back home, I sat at my dining table with a neat stack of new papers. I read every line. I asked questions. I crossed out what I didn't like. When I signed, it was with my own steady hand, fully awake to the weight of each stroke of the pen. In my revised will, Nathan's name was gone. So was Rebecca's. I left modest provisions for my grandchildren's education and made sure the rest would never funnel back through him. As I capped my pen, I felt something settle in me. I could not change that my son had treated me like a resource to be emptied, but I could refuse to let him write the final chapter of my life. This, I realized, was what it meant to choose myself. In the days that followed, everything that had been hidden began to surface. The way silt rises when a river's bottom is disturbed. For years, Nathan and Rebecca had relied on silence. Mine, theirs, and the silence between the things they did not say. But once the first truth cracked open, more truths followed, each one heavier than the last. The investigation moved quickly. Officer Grant called me 2 mornings after the incident, just as I was pouring coffee into my new blue mug. His voice held a mix of apology and reassurance. Ms. Monroe, we've obtained some additional material. A neighbor provided surveillance footage that may support your statement. We'll bring a copy by later today. I thanked him, though I didn't fully understand what he meant until he arrived. He set a small USB drive on my dining table and explained that my next-door neighbor, Mr. Caldwell, had doorbell cameras that faced part of my driveway. When the police asked if he had seen anything unusual, he thought of a memory from 3 weeks earlier. Rebecca standing at my front door while Nathan pointed at a clipboard, demonstrating a signature. He had assumed it was some home repair paperwork. Now, watching the footage, it was unmistakable. Nathan guiding Rebecca's hand as she traced the shape of my signature again and again. When Officer Grant left, the house filled with a silence that was no longer gentle. It was knowing. It was final. Word spread quickly, as it always does in neighborhoods like ours. People who had known Nathan as a boy, who remembered him riding his bike up and down the sidewalk, began to speak in careful, lowered voices. I didn't seek gossip, but fragments reached me anyway. That he had borrowed money from friends and never repaid it. That he had left one job after accusations of mishandling accounts. That he had tried to start a business with a friend and left the friend with unpaid taxes. None of these things had been told to me before. I suppose people assumed I knew, or that a mother would not want to hear. Rebecca, for her part, seemed to unravel in private. The afternoon after Mr. Caldwell provided the footage, she packed her belongings and left the house she shared with Nathan. A mutual friend of theirs told me, somewhat hesitantly, that Rebecca had confronted him, shouting that she never agreed to prison time for his decisions. She accused him of dragging her into something she only half understood, and then she walked out. She did not return. By the end of that week, Nathan's bank accounts were frozen. The debt collectors he had been evading resurfaced with renewed force now that his name appeared in a police report. I never asked for details, but I overheard enough voicemails he left on my phone before I blocked his number. His voice frantic, desperate. "Mom, please call me back. They're saying things I can't fix. Please, I need help. Just talk to me." But I didn't. I couldn't. Every word he spoke sounded like another attempt to pull me back into the same old pattern. The one where I rushed to smooth over mistakes and shield him from consequences. This time I let the silence stand. Friends of his pulled away. People who once invited him for barbecues now stepped back. A man who had once been proud of his charisma was suddenly alone with the wreckage of his choices. Meanwhile, the developer, Atlantic Oaks, sent a formal notice stating that the transaction was under legal review, and that no further action would be taken until the investigation concluded. Their tone was polite, distant, and unmistakably cautious. They wanted no part of a fraud case. Nathan left 3 more messages before the block took effect. The last one was barely audible between his breaths. "Mom, I didn't mean for this to go so far. You know I've always tried. I just needed help. Please don't do this." But I wasn't the one who had done anything. The consequences belonged to him. At night, when the house settled and the cicadas began their summer drone, I sometimes sat at the edge of my bed and felt the weight of it all. Not guilt exactly, but the ache of something that had died long before the police arrived. I had loved my son with a full, steady heart, but love could not erase the truth. He had chosen every step that led him here. The community's whispers grew louder, the police file grew thicker, and Nathan's world shrank to the size of his phone screen, waiting for a call that would never come. This was the cost of what he had done, and for the first time I was no longer the one paying it. After weeks of paperwork, interviews, and quiet evenings spent sorting through the remnants of what my life had been, I finally stepped into my new home. A small single-story cottage near the water, pale yellow with white shutters. The place wasn't grand, and it didn't need to be. It felt like a breath I had been holding for years. The first morning there, I stood by the kitchen window and watched sunlight slide across the countertop. The silence was different from the silence in my old house. This one wasn't heavy or suspicious. It wasn't filled with the echo of doors opening that I hadn't heard or papers moved when I wasn't looking. It was a quiet that welcomed me, not one that pressed against me. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time. Books first. Then the framed photo of Daniel smiling at the beach, wind in his hair. Then my new mug. A soft blue ceramic cup painted with waves. An impulse purchase that felt symbolic. A beginning that belonged only to me. I made tea and sat on the small porch that overlooked the marsh. The air carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed grass. A heron lifted itself from the water, its wings slow and sure. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to rush, explain, or brace myself for something taken out of my hands. The phone stayed quiet. Nathan could no longer reach me, and the absence of his voice felt like space clearing inside my chest. No guilt-couched requests. No apologies sharpened by self-pity. Just silence and peace. I began walking each morning along the narrow path behind the cottage. Some days I passed neighbors who nodded politely. Other days I walked alone, letting the rhythm of my steps settle the remaining ache. Healing isn't loud. It's a slow rearranging of what you believe you deserve. One afternoon, I visited a small community center by the docks. They needed volunteers for a reading program. The coordinator, a kind woman with silver hair, handed me a stack of children's books and smiled as if she already knew I would stay. And I did. The laughter of children, their unfiltered curiosity. It stitched something inside me that betrayal had torn open. Evenings in the cottage felt warm, not lonely. I lit a lavender candle, opened a book, and rested my feet on a worn ottoman. No one monitored my mail. No one hinted that I was forgetful. No one moved through my home as if it were theirs. I had reclaimed my life not through revenge but through clarity. through choosing myself after years of choosing everyone else. And in this small home by the water, I felt something I had not felt in years. Safe. Family, I've learned, is not defined by blood or by the stories we cling to out of habit. It is defined by who protects your dignity, not who quietly erodes it. I used to believe loyalty meant endurance, that loving someone required absorbing their harm. But standing on my small porch now, watching the light settle over the water, I finally understand. Love without respect is only a slow kind of disappearing. I lost my home, my savings, and the image I held of my son. Yet what I gained feels steadier than any foundation he tried to sell out from under me. I gained clarity, the kind that comes only after the floor has dropped away, and you are forced to build your own ground again. I gained the right to live without fear of someone else's chaos. I gained a life that answers to me, quietly and honestly. Sometimes the wind carries distant voices from boats along the coast, and for a heartbeat I imagine Nathan as a boy again, mud on his shoes, asking me to watch him try something new. That memory is still mine. But the man he became is separate from the child I raised, and I am allowed to release him without bitterness. If you are standing where I once stood, torn between love and self-preservation, hear me when I say this. You do not owe your future to people determined to sabotage their own. Choose peace. Choose boundaries. Choose yourself. And if this story touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear more truths, where silence becomes strength.